I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls Next Door. And we are continuing our representation series.
Yeah.
Yes. And for today, we are going to be talking about how people with disabilities are represented in horror, which we have, I'm sure, touched upon previously in like random episodes, but this episode is all about it. And we have invited a special guest to help us talk about this. So we've invited Pascale of Liberty Resources and Adapt. So welcome, first off.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Yeah. And I guess, like, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and why they should trust you when we tell them to.
Yeah, so I have an invisible disability, much like one of the co-hosts here.
Me!
Not to out anybody, but, disability pride, what's up? And I've been working at Liberty Resources for the past 4 years. It's the Center for Independent Living here in Philadelphia. We basically advocate with people with disabilities, not for them, with them. Mm-hmm. Our main goal is to get folks out of nursing institutions and back into the community, but we have a huge intersectional advocacy sort of platform that we do. We talk about sexuality, housing, employment, so many things. And it's just, we're actually a really cool group. I'm really excited to work where I work. I'm in my mid-30s and I've never loved my job before working here.
Oh, that's awesome.
Great.
I also really love Liberty Resources. And also you're a part of a really cool activist group. Adapt.
Yeah, so originally Adapt came from the name Americans with Disabilities for Accessible Public Transportation, but they've since really expanded their scope to anything regarding people with disabilities on the federal, state, or city level. Anytime you're in Philadelphia and you see folks in wheelchairs chaining themselves to SEPTA buses, that's us.
Nice.
We're the ones who are blocking traffic. We're the ones who are, doing sit-ins and die-ins at local politicians' offices. I don't know if you guys remember that movie, Me Before You.
It sounds familiar.
It does sound familiar. But
So not to go too in depth into another movie, but
yeah, do it.
It's about this handsome young playboy, he's a millionaire, and he gets hit by a car and acquires, I believe, quadriplegia. And Khaleesi from Game of Thrones is his attendant.
Yes.
They fall in love. Everything's wonderful. Yes.
I heard
and
this.
he can't stand to be this burden on her any longer. And so he opts for assisted suicide to leave her all of his money so that she could live the life that she deserves. But having to take care of somebody, And so all of the people that, we serve and the people in our activist group Adapt, we were like, this is ridiculous. We never get to see ourselves represented as, a romantic interest. And this is what we get. And so we went to the movie theater down by Columbus Boulevard. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or not. But we had a die-in. Like, people crawled out of their wheelchairs. I had chalk and I chalked outline all their bodies. Gosh. We had the media there. We were shaming people going to go see the movie. It was like a Tuesday. I got paid to do that. It was great.
That's awesome.
I love my job. Fantastic.
Yes. I wish we could do that for a lot of these, especially with this representation series.
Yeah, how cool would that
be? If we
be?
could just go and be like, no more this.
Right.
These people, you need to change. We need to change our representation.
How about you put the people that you're representing behind the pen and paper or behind the camera, and we can tell our own stories.
Yeah.
How about that?
And then it's actually done correctly.
Is that ridiculous? Is that too much to ask?
I think most of the world says yes.
Yeah, right.
It's like all the fancy people in the fancy chairs.
They're remarkably incorrect.
Men money, and they're sitting there like, I don't like change.
Yes, Mr. Moneybags.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like my narratives. Yeah.
Yes. We
Or
need
my
more.
versions of other narratives.
We need more cishet white males. What do you mean, women in Marvel?
The real oppressed class. Yeah.
Oh my God, when they were marching, I can't. I was just like, what do you mean? You
Straight
always
pride.
mattered. More than everyone.
That's the
Why
whole
are
point.
you upset?
Yes.
So dumb.
Which is exactly why we have things like this podcast. So if you can't tell, this episode's going to be super fun. We're talking about disability, how it's represented in horror. And spoiler, it's pretty bad usually. There is a turning point. I feel like we are coming up on some things that are getting better, and we will highlight those. So we're going to talk about the films Hush and A Quiet Place. We will touch upon some things that you might hear. Other movies that did bad jobs, right? But primarily those two, because they got some good stuff going on. So stay tuned.
Facts. Yeah, facts. We tell you facts. All the facts. Hear facts. Still facts. About that spooky stuff. Yeah, spooky stuff.
All right, so we are talking about disability in horror, and specifically the ways that it is used as a tool generally, the tropes that we encounter, some of the real life horrors that people encounter, right? What I kind of wanted to pick your brain about, Pascale, first is just as like a general thing. It doesn't have to be horror, but what are some, like you've already kind of touched on it, but what are some things that you've seen on film in reference to people with disabilities and how they're usually portrayed?
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be like maybe one or two really two-dimensional portrayals of people with disabilities. A lot of the stereotypes are that they're really passive, that they're ineffectual as people, that they're asexual. That's a huge stereotype about people with disabilities. Basically, that the disability is somehow a weakness or something that counts against them as people, makes them less fun, makes them curmudgeonly, makes them less of a person, when in fact disability is just part of the beautiful, diverse tapestry that humanity has. Like 1 in 5 people in the world have a disability, and that's more common than people who are natural redheads. So
Yeah.
it's not a bizarre thing to have. It's not a abnormal thing to experience. And in fact, the longer you live, the higher likelihood that you're going to join our community. And it's an equal opportunity, minority experience. It really is. At any point in time, somebody could join our community. And we're just
Today.
it's today. Join our community today.
Sign on up. Yeah.
But yeah, and so, people with disabilities tend to be the reason why people get, like, maybe caught in, like in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's the brother who's a wheelchair user, and he is constantly whining and complaining, and he's constantly a drag on the group. He's constantly a deterrent, something that's distracting from the group's ability to survive. Like, he provides almost nothing to the group's survival. Or even before the threat occurs to the group, he's just a negative. He had to come because everyone felt bad that they didn't invite him. Like, there was there's never anything positive or valuable about the person who has a disability, because that is all that they are. All that they are is their disability.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like we see it, so the whole representation series. It's like every time anyone has a thing that's different, they're just like,
That's all they are.
That's all they are.
That's all
They
they
have
are.
no other component to
Right.
them, and it's like, it's not how life is.
Right.
Like, people exist, and they are so many different
We are
things.
multi-dimensional, fully realized creatures, all of us.
We contain multitudes, to quote Walt Whitman. We are large, we contain multitudes.
You can have a disability and a mental illness and some talents and like a bunch of other things going on.
It's like, oh, don't get me started on the inspiration porn that I see on Facebook all the time. So inspiration porn, for people who don't know, it's when usually able-bodied people or people without disabilities, they see someone with a disability accomplishing something and they say, oh, like, that's amazing. What's your excuse?
Yeah.
And so you see all these people on, like, America's Got Talent who might be blind or deaf, and it turns out they can play an instrument or sing,
Yeah.
and it's regarded as the most amazing, mind-blowing thing, as if, like, because they had disability, that they were just assumed to be worthless.
Yeah.
As if they don't have talent or skills or something to offer society.
Yeah.
It's like, part of having a disability is just part of who you are. It's like being, being white or being American or being straight or queer. It's just part of who you are,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not all you are.
It's not all you are, absolutely. It can be an important part of who you are, but it's nowhere near, like, the entirety of who you are. Maybe that person just wants to go about their life, just because it's like people with disabilities, and they can sometimes, like, do certain tasks in a slower or different way than able-bodied people can, or the people without disabilities do, and that doesn't mean that they want your help. You know, that means that they're doing their task their own way in their own time, and they most of the time want to do it on their own.
Yeah, and it's like, so not even just speaking from like my own experience, like speaking from my own experience, but not personally like about my own experience of having a disability. Is my grandpa, when I was little, the day before I was born, he chopped off his fingers in his hand because he was so nervous about me being born. And he had to wear like he got like severe nerve damage. They sewed the fingers back on, This is, I don't know if that's like a lot of gross stuff I'm saying, but you know, it happened. And they sewed it all back on, and then he had a lot of nerve damage, and he had to wear like this glove for compression. He would do this thing where he would twitch. And I like grew up with that. And it was just like, and he would always get so mad when anyone tried to help him with anything.
Right.
So we would be like, no, like he's got it. Let him go. Like, my grandma would try to cut his food for him. Like, stop cutting his food for him. He wants to cut him himself. And it's like me and my mom would always like defend him in that situation. But it was a very eye-opening thing for me as someone who had not yet discovered they had a disability to be like, yeah, I can do stuff myself. And like, say, like him being like, stop helping me. No. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially
this is a nice shaping thing for my future.
Always assume capability. You know?
Yeah.
And like if somebody looks like they need help, ask and then wait until if they say yes or no. And if they say no, I don't need help, don't be offended. And if they say yes, wait until they tell you how to help them.
But it's so easy for people who aren't seeing that every day that if they see someone who's like in a wheelchair, you're just like, oh, I'll just impose upon you my helping. Which is just inaccurate.
You know, people think they want to be like gold star, you know, good Samaritans. But ableism is one of the most like undersung oppressions that exists in our society. So many people just have this sort of like infantilization of people with disabilities. We think that they're fragile, and we think that they need taking care of, and we don't consider them to be full-grown adults. Who are fully capable of doing things on their own in their own way, just like every one of us.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the films, in kind of like what I found in my research was that it's just very ableist in its thinking, and there are a few like gems in here where we are seeing a change, and I'm super excited to, like, one I haven't seen yet, but I read about it, and I was like, I have to go watch this. Like, I have to see this now. And it's in like a franchise. So it's just like, that's crazy that this franchise is being so like awesome.
Wait, which one is that?
It is actually the Chucky franchise. So
Chucky?
Yes.
What?
Mm-hmm. So in Curse of Chucky and another one. So Kristen Lopez, who's actually a writer on many like film blogs and resources on specifically disability in film. So she was talking on a podcast, which I'll remember in a moment, but she talked about Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky, where there is a protagonist who's disabled who's always been, like, she was born has always been in a wheelchair, but she's like the protagonist and in no way is like that a hindrance, like it's just a part of what's happening. And in the second one, she actually has like a relationship and goes on to have sex with like an able-bodied man when like it's not like discussed or anything. It's just like, this is just a part of it. Yeah, I was like, when you were talking about that, I was like, yes, it exists.
Amazing.
I was like, now I have to get back in here. Yeah.
I have to watch it.
I have to get back involved in the Chucky series. I knew it was only a matter of time. There's like, there's a lot that has been kind of perpetuated throughout film in regards to disability, and specifically in horror. Like in some of the tropes that we see with disabilities are kind of similar or like a take on from other tropes that we see. That I found was really interesting. It's like I was saying, like if someone is different in any way, we're like, you're this now. Like you just serve this purpose, right? Like, and so like there's essentially like this idea that there's the trope of the like magically disabled person. Yes. So the magical Negro, right, that we talked about in our African American women in horror, we have this idea of someone who is disabled, but because of that, they now have unlocked something that the rest of us people can't see or
they
know.
have to sacrifice something to gain,
or like I don't know, Jessica Alba in The Eye, and you're blind, but now you see, because she's blind, now she sees things that we don't see in this like different way, right? Like you're literally just this tool.
Right.
And I will say that one of the films that we talk about does have a little bit of that in there, where someone's disability like is the route out, I guess, like the
inequalities.
Yes. Yep. Yes. But there's also the Kristen Lopez again. She has dubbed it the Tiny Tim character. So it's the one that we're just supposed to like feel bad for. It's just there to evoke sympathy and to just like be like, oh, I'm sad, or like or charm just for that moment. Like it's essentially inspiration porn, but on screen in the way of that. But that's all they're there for is just to do that. But
that's what we saw in Midsummer.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Where the
Ruben,
disabled character is literally a like prophet.
Yes.
And
yeah.
It was like, what?
Yeah,
I don't mention him any other time. He's literally here for a second, and then you just keep showing his face, and I'm drawing stuff, and it was like, why?
I have so much to say about Ruben in Midsummer.
But
the disability, the characters with disabilities it was implied it was through inbreeding, correct?
Yes. It was inbreeding, yeah.
Which is obviously problematic, and a big trope in horror. Again, same thing in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface. And in Hills Have Eyes, it's like there's so many films where it's like disability is a product of some sort of taboo or a sin or whatever your lens is of society.
That's
it's
one.
like you did this, now it's this now.
Well, and the thing I found very interesting is when we make the disabled character. So when we take away just like the magical, like they're the not a protagonist, but like a tool for the protagonist. Right. We move it over to the villain, right? So when they're a villain, what I find, and the major problem I had with Ruben in Midsummer, right, is that his very existence was to be feared. Like, he didn't do anything, right? He was just there. But, like, it was literally, like, to see him on screen so people would cringe.
Right.
And it's like, that's just this man just living. He's just living here. Right. He didn't make himself this, right? Like, he was born, and now everyone's like, he literally was created for that purpose. But that's kind of like what they are, like where they are results of like sinful acts. So you have things like, Wrong Turn, Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But the problem with it is that we have like these, like they're inbred, so they're like monstrous in that way. But then they're also like cannibals too.
Yeah, I mean it's this really unfortunate intersection of class and disability, right?
Yeah.
Where like we consider like the Appalachian poor, to be this like hick hillbilly, like lawless in a really criminal, perverse type of way.
Yeah.
And then when we add the physicality of a disability on top of it, it creates even a more image of the grotesque.
Yeah, absolutely. And in what I thought was something that I found interesting was even thinking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Leatherface and him putting people's faces on his own. And like that act in itself is just like he clearly does not see himself as, good, and that he finds himself to be, and that's why he's murdering people who look otherwise than him. And then he's putting their faces on him. Like it's
all Leatherface needs is love.
Yes, he just needs someone to be like,
he just
you're
needs love.
Beautiful the way you are.
Exactly.
That's what he needs. He needs some Christina Aguilera singing to him, and he would have been fine. We wouldn't have the chainsaw, and he's just kind of doing that really slow run at the end, and it's kind of
that's a great scene.
It's a really good scene.
It's one of my favorite horror movies. The very first Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, and I mean, or even thinking about Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, yeah.
That one comes up a lot.
Absolutely.
And just like literally, he was so grotesque in that he hid away, and now he's a villain because he found love.
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes. Oh, that was my movie growing up. Was Hunchback of Notre Dame.
I had a huge crush on Esmeralda. Yeah. Sidebar.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's real.
I live my life aspiring to be Esmeralda.
That was real.
Yes. Like they're like, give me justice, and I'm like, yes, that is me. And I always just like, why doesn't she end up with Quasimodo? I never understand. Like, she has to have this, smashing blonde, authority figure.
He won't treat you right, baby.
Yeah, he doesn't know. He doesn't
know.
But in the second one, he does find love. Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 is about him, and he gets a girlfriend. So just for everyone who might be wondering.
Does she also have a disability?
No.
See, I was literally like
wonderful.
worried in the same way. I was like, I swear.
Clearly the best guy in town.
He's like so nice.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we met, even like Phantom of the Opera, right? Like if he just was able to get outside and function like a person instead of being cast out here and be like, she totally would have loved him.
Yeah.
Possibly. Or at least given the chance, right?
That it can mean so many different things, that we're not all just one thing. We have
Yes, girl.
invisible disabilities. We have out in the open disabilities that out in the open disabilities can be physical, neurological. It can be mental. Like it's just all
absolutely.
over the spectrum
Absolutely.
of life and existence. And that it's not just one thing. And it really irritates me. It just like upsets me. I'm like such a fundamental.
Yeah.
That it's just like everyone thinks like one that you have to be able to see a disability for it to exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
That like for myself, if you didn't know, I have narcolepsy. That like people for most of my life were just like, you're just sad. I had to go to a doctor and like be like, I am not leaving until you test me
Hell
for
yeah.
something. I was like crying. I was like, I will not leave
Hell
here.
yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you stood up for yourself that way.
And it's like, yeah, we have to be our own advocate most of the time. And
That's the biggest crime.
when people like act like they need to save you when honestly at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, you have to be your own advocate.
Yeah.
And I had to like fight this doctor. And it was a new doctor. I had like gone to like 7 different ones. And it's like from the time I was like 15 until 22. And I was just like, someone needs to believe me because I'm getting to the point where it's like, I'm going to die. And y'all are just telling me I'm fine. I'm not fine. It's not because I'm sad. I'm sad because I feel like this, not because.
Right.
I don't feel like this because I'm sad. I'm
Right.
sad because I feel like this. And it's awful, and I need y'all to fix it or do something or just like do something.
Yeah.
And then it's like after that, it's like, are you faking it? Is it real? I don't know. Like people just don't really have a grasp of what it is. Narcolepsy a lot specifically because it's like very under-researched, underfunded, under everything. Not a lot of people like know they even have it. It gets misdiagnosed a lot too. So it's just like,
Do you feel like if you were a man, they would have believed you sooner?
yes.
Yes.
Gabe said that when I was telling her the story. She was like, that's the thing with women too. It's just like, they just
yeah.
think you're loud and complaining.
Intersectionality.
Yeah, and I'm just like, it would have been really cool if I was born with a penis, maybe. And then they were just like, oh yeah, something must be wrong with you.
Right.
Men don't cry and get sad. You must have a disease.
Instead of being, calm down, you hysterical woman.
It was just like, that was rude. I also just think it's like real rude that generally it's just like one that how it's portrayed in film is just like that they're a burden, and like the whole film that you were talking about at the beginning of this, I was just like, yo.
Yeah.
Yo. Because like honestly, the amount of times I've like just said on a first date, I was like, I have narcolepsy. And then I just wait and I'll see if I like ever hear from them again. Because I'm just like, my existence is a potential deal breaker. I like wrote a song about it. I was like, this is a really fun song. Because the funny thing about Incurable is it doesn't go away. It's like, and it's not a problem if you're like a person that's nice and have patience. And it's just like really rude. That's how I feel about disability representation in life and then in horror and then like in all the things. So I just think it's really interesting that we walk this really like complex line between wanting to be acknowledged as capable and competent human beings in the ways that we are and seeking empathy and understanding in the ways that like we do need help. And it's so like interesting to me how like people have such a hard time grasping that. And it's like we want to be respected as people who can do stuff and like let to do those things. But then also like when we can't, then
Like,
it's like,
understand
oh
that.
yeah, please understand. Don't like be like, oh, you're just doing this for attention or you're faking it. Or like just being like, I'm a nice person and I care about you. Clearly something's happening and how can I help? That's how I
Yeah,
feel.
I mean, as a society in general, we tend to have this idea that if you're vulnerable or need help, that there's no power in that. When in actuality, like, all of us need help at some point in time. Like, no one has an entirely self-sufficient life. We all require help from each other. We're all, like, interdependence is a thing. It's what helped, like, Homo sapiens become what we are today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so like vulnerability is powerful and it's beautiful, and asking for help is the same. And just because you need help in certain ways that are maybe less normalized doesn't make it any less powerful or righteous or valuable.
Filth. some films. Now let's talk about those films. And all that spooky stuff. And all that spooky stuff.
So we're going to talk about Hush and A Quiet Place, which is what our assigned viewing was for this, right? We watched Things specifically. So we do that. Yeah. So we'll start with Hush because that's the older one. So Hush is from 2016. It is directed by Mike Flanagan, who also wrote it alongside his wife Kate Siegel, who stars in it. Mike Flanagan is the director of A Haunting of Hill House and Oculus. So Hush, if you guys have not seen it, it was something that we considered doing for our home invasion episodes, or our isolated inside episode, but we were like, no, we want it to be about like her being deaf, right? So it is about a deaf and mute writer who retreated into the woods to live a solitary life, and now she must fight for her life in silence when a mass killer appears at her window. And it is starring Kate Siegel, who is not deaf, which does affect the film a little bit. For anyone who's for anyone who hasn't experienced like trying to interpret or understand ASL, or someone who is deaf, you probably didn't notice, but people notice. So
I think that there's this one part in the very beginning when the neighbor comes and she's like, I've been learning sign language, and Kate Siegel says, oh, you're gonna have to sign, I could read lips. Like, no deaf person would ever say that. Like, no deaf person would ever just say to somebody who was making an effort to communicate with them, oh, don't worry, don't make an effort to communicate with me, it's fine.
And there's also like this mix of like what this person is capable of doing, right? So the main character, one thing we were laughing about is like she has like no peripheral vision. Yeah.
And no sense of vibrations.
Yeah.
Like when the neighbor is being killed against the kitchen window and she's like pounding on the window for her life, that the deaf woman has no idea what's going on. Like, that's ridiculous. Like
sense vibration.
Yeah, you would absolutely sense the vibrations. She would absolutely either see it in the peripheral vision or feel the vibrations.
Yeah, and she like even later uses vibration to kind of feel where the killer is.
Right, underneath the deck. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just like she clearly can. Like, so what are we like? What are you doing?
Pick it and choose it.
Exactly. What I thought was interesting. So when we first watched it, I thought it was really great. I was like, this is a cool new idea. Like, I watched it with a friend of mine who actually knows ASL and is studying. I think she's done studying to be an ASL interpreter and like do work in that field. So I was like, let's watch this movie together, and like we screamed and we cried and we laughed. It was really fun, and it was just also like fun to be near, because she was like teaching me little bits of sign language too, so we could like see it. I was like, oh, I know that one. Like, even like when we like rewatched it, I was like, oh yeah, I still know these things. And it's interesting. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's essentially like if you took The Strangers, but our protagonist is deaf and mute, right? So that's kind of like what your pitch would be in like the boardroom. Like, all right, imagine this, but instead, right? So that gives us some interesting, stressful situations, right? Like in the fact that he's like, there's those points where he's there, and she's just like not aware of it because she can't hear, and he's like tapping on the window, or he's like singing things and she doesn't see him. But at the same time, it's like in The Strangers, there's so many scenes where they're in the background in the window and we as viewers see it and we're screaming at her, and she's just like, I'm Liv Tyler, what do I care?
Liv Tyler, turn around.
Turn around, she's in the window. She didn't have peripheral vision either, so I guess that's just like a protagonitis thing, like where you just can't see what's around you. But we have this character who's deaf, and we have also this like villain who doesn't have a motive, and he doesn't matter outside of the fact that he's trying to kill this woman.
He apparently hates women and just is trying to enact this rape fantasy through
it's just like
violence.
And what it happens is, so the first half, like the first part of the movie is just to establish, like, yes, this woman is deaf, right? It's just like her friend comes over, tries to tell her sign language. We see little different things that she would do that are different. We get introduced to her fire alarm, which is a flashing light, which I thought was really cool and is very loud. So the vibrations, again, that she would feel would be
Yeah,
there.
her whole thing is like, when I'm sleeping, it will wake me up.
Yeah.
Of the vibrations.
But I can't feel that vibration,
hear tapping.
Ananda, which is, I'm
There's no
sure,
tapping
why the
vibrations.
friend was like probably slamming herself on the door. But the fear happens when her friend who was, I was really sad when she died because it was like,
Yeah, she was
she was
great.
so nice.
I really wanted them to get together. I had a little like queer lady, just
like, but what if?
is like, forget John or whatever that man's name is. Like, you know, you two were made for each other.
Yeah.
They're like texting each other and like grinning at the phone. Like, don't tell me y'all aren't interested.
I straight up think his name was Craig.
The boyfriend,
I
the
think his name
ex-boyfriend
was
was Craig, but the
ex-boyfriend is
friend's,
Craig,
the
yeah.
friend's boyfriend was John.
Gotcha.
I'm
Okay.
pretty sure. And so when the horror kicks off is that the friend is being murdered tragically, and she's like banging on the window and all this stuff. And then the villain then sees her and like is like, why didn't she notice?
He surmises that she's deaf very, very quickly.
Yes, like he kind of like he's just like, what? And then
He
he's
does a
like,
few tests.
He
Yeah.
did, and then he did like come in, and then he saw her sign and was like FaceTiming with her sister, and then left. And that was one
Took
of
her
the
phone.
yeah, that was one of the scariest moments. Was like she writes on the window like, didn't see your face or whatever. Boyfriend coming home, and then he like repeats like exactly what
Verbatim.
her conversation was, which is like
And then also
crazy.
just takes off the mask, which was
Yeah,
like,
that was
yeah,
scary.
that was
oh
weird.
god, you're totally
He
just
does
gonna
not
kill
care.
me.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
like,
Just
this
wants
is your
to murder.
goal.
Yeah, but it there's so many really awesome things in it, and that she is not a victim. Like she's getting pretty hurt. There's a lot of times in that, but that's like kind of a natural thing. But she's always trying. Like
She's
she's
kicking butt,
always
taking
fighting.
names.
Yeah, she is always trying to figure out a way out. She's like out of the house. She's in the house. She's upstairs. She's on the roof. She's in the woods. She's over here. And I found that really exhilarating, right? It was like kind of like a milder version of like You're Next, where it
Yeah.
was like that home invasion, and she just like was like what was she, like a doomsday prepper? So she like had like she like
knew
Home
what was
Alone
up.
the house and booby trapped it, but instead it was like more realistic of like, what do you do if you're there? I was like, it's your house. You know your house really well. Just like don't. What are you doing? I don't know. But it was super exciting. There's a blog by a woman, Rebecca Ann Withy, I hope I'm saying your name right, where she reviewed the movie Hush, and she is someone who's deaf. And so some things that she found that were ridiculous was like the fact that she could read lips from someone who's like really, really far away.
And he was like slack-jawed. Like, he was barely moving his mouth.
Yeah.
He like spoke like he was trying to not express what he was saying.
Yeah, because he was supposed to be unemotional and all. And then she also said that her lip pattern changed from being non-existent to overly accentuating, and it wasn't consistent.
Yeah, the one thing that I noticed from her sign language is that there was no expression in her face. Like when she was showing her friend the sign for the curse the B word.
Yes.
She did the sign, but her face was completely expressionless.
Yeah.
And so much of ASL is like the expression, like your eyebrows and your face, and when she's saying like, oh yeah, it gets really loud, and like if a native ASL speaker was seeing it, you would see their entire body being used to speak, to communicate. And so for that, it was really clear to me that it was a hearing actress performing ASL, not necessarily a native speaker, because she was only utilizing her hands and not her face on her whole body.
Yeah.
ASL is an incredibly expressive language.
Yeah, it's like when you see the interpreters at like rap concerts.
Yes.
That's like one of my favorite things to watch, and they get really into it. Or like I watch
You see
occasionally.
Waka Flocka, who didn't know what she was doing, and she
Yeah,
thought
and
that she
then
was
he
dancing,
yeah.
and he tried to like emulate
So
her signs because she
embarrassing.
thought that she was dancing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like Chance the Rapper did a whole video with his
Chance
interpreter.
is great for having the interpreters.
Yeah, he was like, we're going to do this whole, like, he did a whole video just to talk on Instagram about it.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was pretty cool. Like, even, like, when you watch, like, instructional videos on YouTube for ASL, there's always like little subtitles that are like accentuate your eyebrows.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
like it's a question with your face, or like if you know, you're like shaking your head, and like you're just kind of like putting all like, and then they move so fast usually, but she was just like very slowly moving her hands to tell the story. I think what was really interesting about this film was that because she is deaf and mute, there's less than 15 minutes of dialogue in this whole film, which was great. And now I feel like people don't, like, you don't even really realize because it's just action.
I get where it went wrong, but I did very much enjoy the film. Yeah, it was like one of those things where it's like, you clearly like tried. You could have cast somebody who was actually deaf, and that would have been good.
That would have been awesome, actually.
Yeah, like that would have been the better route.
There's
to
so
go.
many actors who are deaf. That would
Yes.
that would have been perfect.
Yeah. And it's a shame very much that didn't happen, but it was a fun time. It was kind of like, yeah.
And I read that the reason why they didn't cast a deaf actor in the lead role, besides I'm sure the fact that Kate Siegel wanted to play the role, was that in the very end there is the voiceovers of the main character talking to herself. But there are plenty of people who are deaf who are verbal. Like not every deaf person is nonverbal. And so, like, you could have had a deaf person speak that. You could have even had Kate Siegel do the voiceover if you really wanted to, you know? But the main character said that the voice in her head
Was
sounded
her
like
mom's.
her mom.
Yeah, it was literally
So you
about
could have
to,
just
like,
had
they
the
just
mom
said it-
speak.
They said it wasn't even her voice.
Right.
Yeah.
It was
It's like
the whole
there's
thing.
no reason not to cast a deaf actor in that role.
Yeah, and
My
even
wife wanted to do it.
yeah, he was definitely like,
Right.
I gotta get the rights for my wife.
But like the way like deafness is talked about in the film is like not super great either. Like I completely agree with you that like she had agency, she was powerful. Like it's not often that you see a woman, much less a woman with a disability, being able to fill that space. But you know, like she talked about her deafness and she said like isolation happened to me. I didn't pick it. And she was obviously talking about her deafness. You see, she's an author, and on the author bio of the book, I forget the exact language, but it's a little bit ableist, talking about how she was like stricken with deafness at a very young age and how something was taken from her, etc. And there's that weird part in the middle where the serial killer says that like, oh well, she's deaf, so she couldn't have called 911.
Yeah.
Does he think that deaf people can't call 911?
Yes.
Like 911 doesn't exist for deaf people? Because it does, I promise.
Yes. I also peeked that because it was like
I wrote that down. Like deaf people can call 911.
because I was like, there's something wrong with this premise. Like immediately when she like, I was like, what? And like both because it's like it's the killer talking to the boyfriend
John,
who
right.
came up, and he's like, yep, that sounds truth.
Right.
I was like, what? Why don't you know? Like, what do you? I was like, why wouldn't she have called? I was like, that's not a accurate. Like you didn't need that conversation at all.
911 is for everyone but the deafies.
Yeah,
You know?
And like if we were reaching, we're reaching for little pieces of grass of optimism or whatever.
Yeah.
Straws. I don't know what the phrase is anymore.
Sure.
Maybe they were trying to show how many people just don't understand what it is to be deaf, but I know
No,
that's
that's
not what they
very
were
generous.
doing.
That's
right?
very
I know
generous.
that's not what they were doing.
Mike,
but like
she's trying for
on
you.
Twitter later, Mike would be like, I was just saying that,
Mike,
like, I
I
really
was
wanted to
just-
show that, like, that they, like, really don't understand what it is to be deaf. And it was, like, you know how, like, you always say about the people who, like, have a critique or they're saying, like, is this why you did this? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
That
in
sounds
retrospect,
good.
yeah.
that
Yes,
sounds like a
they
great
give you
reason. So,
a
yeah, that's
reason.
what it was.
You're leading the witness.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like, and I enjoy Kate Siegel as an actress, but this is like, when I think I was like, oh, she's also in Haunting of Hill House, where she plays a queer woman, and so just like, and again, it comes down to that thing, like, we can't shake her and be like, what is your orientation? But it's also like, what are we doing out here, Kate? Like, Mike, why are you doing this? Why are you putting your wife out here in these roles? So
She's a very good actress.
she is a very
but
great actress.
Put representation
Like, come on
with
now.
the people, with the things, with the stuff.
Or,
with the
like,
Otherwise,
things.
it just feels like tourism.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, you're just trying it on.
Right.
just and it's for like the kicks, right? It's just like for a film that's strangers, but it's deaf. Like that's literally what it is for that punchline, right? There was also the issue I had was that her phone, one was on the ringtone.
I had the ringtone on.
I was like, in what world? Why? She had this ringtone, and I was like, why is it not on vibrate? And then it was vibrate, but I was like, why doesn't she have the flash?
The flash thing wasn't on.
It did when she flipped it over, but that was like later.
A long time, because I was just like, this is the one time where it's applicable because there's so many people who have the flash on, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you don't need this.
Absolutely.
It's like I was like, this is the one time I would allow it.
It's like in the first scene, they were like, oh, that was a really good scene. We don't want to get rid of it. We'll just add it in later. And then like in the later scene, they show the flash and they show the vibrating. But the first scene, they did not. It had just
honestly,
the
just the fact that there was a ringtone didn't make any sense. There shouldn't like in what world would she need that?
Also, she was completely quiet.
Yes, that also bothered me.
And so like nonverbal doesn't mean that you make no sounds. Like deaf people are actually known for being very loud people.
Yeah.
You know, they quite literally can't hear themselves, and there's vocalizations that they make. And they're known as very like loud people who take up a lot of space. Like thank goodness that they are. You know, that's a good thing. But yeah, she was completely silent.
Yeah,
it didn't make any sense. And I think in the back of her bio, her author bio, it said something about like her vocal cords were paralyzed, forget the term, or something like that, but that it still wouldn't mean that you would make no noise.
Yeah, I think they try to cop it out of her being mute. Like, I think John says it. Like, when he's like, oh yeah, this is my girlfriend's friend who's deaf and mute. And then, like, and that's the same conversation of her being like, she can't call 911, but it's like, why? Yeah. Why? Yeah, I think that was
the preferred
weird.
terminology is nonverbal. I think deaf mute is a little bit of an older term.
Nice. Even better, Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike. What are you doing, bud? Yeah. Well, and I think, that's something I like turned to Kat and I was like, she's not making any sounds. And I was like, that's really weird. It's like, and like if you've ever like talked to anyone or met anyone who is deaf, like you would know that. So
exactly.
It's just like, did they not interact with anyone this whole time?
Exactly. There was no one on set. There was no one that they talked to about how can we make this realistic. You know, and I think that there are a couple details throughout the film that you can really see that there was no deaf people that were involved in this film at all.
As opposed to... good segue into A Quiet Place.
So A Quiet Place is from 2018, director John Krasinski.
Yes.
Who was on The Office. Yep.
But now he's an action bod dad now.
Yeah, no, he was just like, Jim.
Jim who?
Shirt ripped open. Yeah, that's the whole moment.
He's the Jim now.
I am Jim now. In a post-apocalyptic world, a family is forced to live in silence while hiding from monsters with ultra-sensitive hearing. And the exciting part of this is that there is a deaf character in the film who is actually deaf in real life.
Yes.
And, like, spoilers, saves the day.
She does. And in ways that are outside of even her disability. Like, so there's a whole plot in what I was kind of hinting at before in regards to, like, using their disability as, like, the finishing touch for your heroes, is that her hearing aid causes really high frequency that disrupts harms these creatures, right? But even regardless of that situation, she's a hero in and of itself. And her own turmoil happens to just be from like actual real life stuff.
Like she's the best character in the whole film, first of all.
Yes.
The actress' name is Millicent Simmons, I believe. Is that correct?
That's such a cool name.
Yes. Such a cool name. Yeah, definitely.
Cool name. You have a cool name. She has a cool name.
It's interesting because oddly enough, she has a cochlear implant. And they don't provide feedback, but hearing aids provide feedback.
Oh.
So if you're watching this movie and this scenario happens in real life and you have a cochlear implant, don't think that it'll work the exact same way in the film. If you have a hearing aid, it might work the exact same way. But
What I see. we get a little and we lose a little. But I will say with this is that because we have this actress, it is profoundly better, right? So for one, everyone on set was learning ASL to talk to her, right? It also was like a real like win in the film, in the fact that like this really is like her superpower. In the fact like in a world where you cannot communicate with your words, ASL is perfect, right? So it makes me kind of think of kind of like certain Afrofuturist like books. So there's like a short story that someone somewhat local had written where there was like this disease because of the sun. It was too much. So then it was like people who were darker melanin were able to go outside, whereas white people were not able to go outside. And that's what I was thinking. I was like, in this world, like she is the best equipped character. Like it kind of like for everyone else, she's not, because she can't hear if someone else makes sound or if she made a sound to attract them. But when it comes to communicating, she's already like leagues ahead in this family.
And she is fearless.
Yes.
She is ready to go out and learn how to do all the skills, learn how to catch the fish, learn how to put everything together, and it's her family that's holding her down because they think well, I assumed it was because of a disability. It may have been because she like may have been responsible for her brother's death. I don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot of Yeah.
But I loved the scene when the father is trying to get her to wear the cochlear implant, and she's like, no, I don't want to, it doesn't work. And there's this great sort of like fight, not really a fight between them, but he keeps on trying to get her to wear it and she doesn't want to. And it's so representative of the history of deaf people, of hearing people trying to make them to abandon sign language, to learn oralism, to try to be anything that they aren't, to try and be quote unquote normal. And they just want to be themselves, you know. Like you see kind of all the time. This was actually a little bit of a learning experience for me, actually. Maybe a year ago, I read this article about this young man in Kenya who had created these gloves that would translate hand signs into verbal language. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. People can communicate better, you know? And I sent the article to my deaf friends, and every single one of them was like, this is not what we want.
Yeah.
We do not want to assimilate to hearing culture. We don't want to somehow, you know, make it easier to, like we want you guys to learn ASL. We want you guys to interact with us. You know, why are we always the ones who have to like compromise our language and our culture?
Yeah. Buy these expensive gloves so that you can hear me.
Yeah,
like
exactly. You know, like, or you can just respect my culture. And it is a culture, you know, when people like write out deaf, they have a capital D deaf, you know, because it is a culture. And it's so much more than I think many hearing people assume it is. And so I just really loved that scene when her standing up for herself and be like, no, I don't need to hear. I don't need to be like you. I don't need to have this thing attached to me. And no shade to people who are deaf who have cochlear implants. It's one of those things that's completely, you know, based on someone's preference. But when something is forced upon somebody, that's obviously not okay.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she stood up for her own agency and said, no, I don't want this, was such an amazing scene for me.
Yeah, and it was a lot of like the relationship with her and her father was a big part of what, like it was just a family drama, really, with the backdrop of like monsters will come and kill you, right? But it was really like he is trying in the way that he thinks he can, so he's trying to fix this implant, and that's like how he represents his love for her. When he could have just been like, let me teach you how to fish, and let me make you, like, help you become just an adult, right? And so I think that's where, that's like a classic story that we see, and it was done in such a natural and beautiful way. And one thing that I found in researching this was this term, deaf gain, which is coined by Dirksen Bauman and Joseph J. Murray. And I got this from an article called How 2018 Horror Explored Disability and Represented It for the Better. And it's Marissa Mirabai, who's actually like works alongside Kristen Lopez. So I'm telling you,
Awesome.
I love her. But it's essentially that deaf cane encompasses the myriad ways in which both deaf people and society at large have benefited from the experience of deaf people in sign language throughout history. So even just thinking, like me and Kat were talking about how we watch everything with subtitles.
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, so do I.
everything.
So
and
do I.
I feel like if I go somewhere and there's no subtitles on it, I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore.
I can't focus. I'm not deaf, but I don't hear very well. and it's just
Accessibility is
nice-
good for everyone, as it
just
turns
nice.
out.
Yeah,
it's just
Accessibility is
cool.
good for everyone.
Yeah, it's a good time.
And just it's augmented with the closed captions. You know,
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
when it says like steamy music or like funky
Yeah.
beat comes on. It's like, all right, yeah.
Yeah,
Oftentimes it'll say something. It'll be like a phrase will come up and like, no one said that. Like I didn't hear that. Where
I
did
would
that come
completely
from?
missed it if it wasn't in closed captions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And and I remember from the training with you was that there's so many ways that when we make things accessible, it's not just for like the disabled community, it's for everyone. It benefits everyone.
But I'll tell you how low the bar is for disabilities in horror films, but particularly deafness. There was the movie The Silence that came out with the little girl from Mad Men. But the quote-unquote sign language that they used was complete gibberish.
What?
It wasn't actual sign language. It was made-up signs so they thought that hearing audience would understand what the signs meant. But it wasn't sign
What?
language. It was
Okay.
complete gibberish to anyone who is deaf or anyone who speaks ASL. Like that is that. So just the fact that they were using proper ASL in both of these films,
Yeah, we're like,
it was like
woo!
already like, oh, thank goodness.
So I think this film was definitely great. There's things in it, but it was really decent. I was very worried because people loved it so much, and Kat and I watched it late. Like we didn't watch it immediately, and we were like unreasonably late for people who have a horror podcast. And I was
Yes,
like,
that's
oh
fair.
man, I was like, if we watch this and then we're sad, I'm gonna be real upset. Like I don't. And it was so good, and I felt that same way about Hereditary. So it was just like, oh good, there are still some good fun rides, and this one was so great. And like the way that I was reading into like the way that they frame the main character and like to kind of present her, but how there was a really great quote again, and then I'll leave it at that, by the same woman, where it says, by the time the audience learns that Reagan is deaf, she is a multifaceted character harnessing the responsibilities of being the oldest sibling, and her lack of hearing is not merely a plot device, but a part of who she is. Reagan's impairment isn't fetishized, as her storyline is complex and not solely defined by a disability. This portrayal strays from evoking mere pity, instead requiring Reagan to earn her redemption as she consistently tries to prove her capability by volunteering to accompany her dad and learning survival tactics when her younger brother is reluctant to do so. So, yeah, it's all the things that we said, right? She's a person. She's not just a deaf person, right? Like she's not the deaf person for this story so that we can have a loose plot.
Yeah, and I think beyond challenging ableist norms, I think she even challenges gender norms in her family. The family is oddly socially conservative. The mom is literally barefoot and pregnant most of the time.
Yes.
And the mom never really advocates for her daughter. She always is sort of demure to her husband, very supportive of the husband, never really says anything, doesn't have a ton of opinions, and
Emily, what are you doing?
Reagan is just no, I want to learn. I am a human being. I am powerful.
Yeah.
I am vulnerable. I am everything that a human being is. Let me be.
Let me do it.
Exactly.
Let me be human here.
Yeah, and even
Y'all
still
could benefit from some more human happening.
Exactly.
yeah, you could. Yeah.
My brother's not going to do it. Let me do it.
Yeah, the other one, sorry.
You're out here traumatizing this little boy. I want to go. What do you mean?
I do love the part where he's like, I'm scared. And the mom's like, there's nothing to be scared of. And he's like, of course there is. Have you seen those monsters?
There's plenty of things to be afraid of.
But like, even nowadays, I'd be like, what do you mean? Have you been outside? Yeah, I think and I will say, like, what I found really great, that's, like, complete opposition from most of the films that we've seen with a disabled character is, like, her real, like, internal battle isn't, like, who am I and how do I fit into society? It's, my brother died because I wasn't able to save him, and so I feel responsible for that. And then I also feel like my family judges me and is blaming me as well, which is, like, that's a human thing. Right. She's just doing that instead of just being like, will I ever, like, I don't know, find my place in this world despite
who
this
will
awful
love me
thing.
since
Yeah.
I'm deaf? You know?
I'm pretty, but I'm deaf.
Right.
What?
I know I'm pretty for a deaf girl, but who will love me? You know?
What a crazy phrase.
Yeah.
Oh no.
The world is a horrible, ugly place.
Yes.
Feelings. Yeah, feelings. Yeah, I said feelings. Let's talk about feelings. Okay. And all that spooky stuff. I love spooky stuff.
So, if you like it, it's nothing about us without us, which is a great phrase that Pascale just taught us.
Facts on facts.
Which is I've just decided
but I'm just
is
saying.
the tagline for every single episode in this series.
Nothing about us without us.
Yeah, like that's literally what we've been saying this whole time in a nice, fun phrase
We're
that
not
we can
asking that
chant.
much. It's not a radical agenda.
No, like don't write stories that aren't yours. Write what you know. Yeah, and if you don't like it, it's you are beautiful, no matter what they say. Words can't bring you down.
Oh,
nice.
I gotta sing it.
And that was to Leatherface. So
It's like anyone who's has to be a villain in a movie because they have a disability.
Yes.
No one
It's
like
so
told
awesome.
them
It's
they're
also-
great.
It's so often a marker of being a villain.
yeah,
That's like Captain Hook to Dr. Strangelove to Scar from Lion King. Like it's
Society doesn't define you.
yeah. It's just like as soon as they show up, you're like, oh, I know what this is, right? The same thing like with mental illness. We were saying if
Flip
someone
tables, like,
discloses that they have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, we're like, oh,
Whole
this
family's
explains
murdered,
everything, I guess.
Ugh.
For the topic of how disability has been shown in horror films over the history of the world until now. And we can have a mixed review because there's some good and there's some bad, what we found, right? How are we feeling? I'm glad that we made it.
Mostly bad.
Yeah, it's definitely mostly bad.
yeah.
With
It's definitely
recently
mostly
being
bad.
like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Like the bar is so low.
Yeah,
The
no,
bar
it's
is
really,
so low.
Yeah.
You know.
How about for Hush?
Hush. I don't know.
Bag, man.
Um.
It's fun, but
Yeah, I think there was enough things that were lacking. I don't know. It just felt very. It would have made such a difference if it was a deaf actress that was playing the lead, or if there's any evidence that they
Yeah.
like talk to a deaf person.
Yes.
You know, it just seemed like no one involved in the movie had ever spoken to a deaf person before.
Yeah.
and like
So-
if they did, not a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the research is not extensive enough. Like they did a little, but they didn't do
Yeah.
what they needed to do.
Yeah. A lot of the ASL wouldn't even been considered correct because there is no expressions in the
Yeah.
face. So it wouldn't even been considered proper ASL.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like
Do the research.
yeah, I think it's kind of like what we were saying, like with what keeps you alive, right? Is that we don't know if the writer is bisexual or not. She is married to a man, so we don't know, right? But it was this idea that they were very intentional. Like they were like, we are telling this story, so we want to make sure we are telling it as well as we are able to. Whereas I feel like Hush is not doing that. It was just like, this is kind of fun. It's a fun twist
Right.
on the old tale of home invasion, instead of being like, who is this person? Can we have a person? That's not our character, instead of just a plot.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah. What about For a Quiet Place?
A Quiet Place, I really think they did really well. The ASL was largely spot on. I think that there were a couple times when it was a little bit literal for a hearing audience. There was a couple times when the dad said another time, and when he signed "I have always loved you," it was very word for word rather than meaning for meaning, which is how ASL and English is translated. But for the most part, I think you could really tell the difference between actually having deaf people in the conversation and in the creative process, as opposed to Hush. So I would give Quiet Place a higher mark for sure.
Yeah.
At least a B plus. At least a B plus.
Yes. Yeah, we
They
still got
passed.
room, right, to grow.
Yeah,
always.
they passed for sure. They passed for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be watching the 2 Chucky films.
Yeah.
To see what's going on with that, because I got really excited. I was like, what?
Yeah. Check out The Silence if you want to hate watch something.
Yes. Oh, we do like doing that. Well, thank you so much, Pascale, for
Thank
joining
you
us.
so much. I had so much fun. Thank you guys.
You're real
Yeah.
dope.
Yeah,
There they are.
I think it's been very, very helpful. I'm just excited that we're getting to cover these topics that we've encountered along the way. Where we're like, wait, we know this is messed up, but this episode isn't where we're going to do it, right? So it's just like, let's just make an entire episode where we do it. And I think it's nice sometimes to see where we're making progress, and it makes me feel better, as opposed to like watching things. I mean, like burn it all down. We don't need movies anymore. Well, if our
think it's called
listeners, yes, if our listeners want to reach you, one, they can email us as always at theghouls@gmail.com and just be like, this is for Pascale, and I will forward it to her. But also, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what are some ways they can do so?
Yeah, so definitely check out Liberty Resources. Again, it's the Center for Independent Living in Philadelphia. Our website is libertyresources.org. Definitely check out Philadelphia ADAPT chapter. ADAPT is a nationwide collective of activist groups. Philly is known as being the most aggressive and oldest. That's how we
Yes.
do in Philly.
Yeah.
We meet at Liberty Resources the first Wednesday of every month. So if you want, you can email the ladies at Ghouls Next Door. You can email me at pascalvalet@libertyresources.org. Yeah, definitely check us out. Also on Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and don't get married.
married,
Till
leave
your
your
kids. Yeah.